in today's episode of the ImanWire Podcast.
If we ground ourselves in our Islamic spirituality and our Islamic morality, this will not keep us back. It will not restrain us. It will not weaken us. It will give us immense power, confidence, and wisdom at the same time.
We can't be reckless in the name of being courageous, as Imam Ghazali talks about mizam al-amal, that we have the wasit, which is shaja'ah, and then we have recklessness on one side and cowardice on the other. So we can't confuse being reckless for being courageous.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of the ImanWire Podcast. I am joined here by my dear friend and Imam Sami Zaharna. Ahlan wa sahlan.
Ya marhaban. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are honored this evening to be joined by two scholars and activists in their own realms and in their own mashallah discipline. We are also looking forward to this discussion in realm of the many things that are happening throughout the ummah and our community in the West at large. With that being said, I am deeply honored to welcome Imam Dawud Walid. Ahlan wa sahlan. Kif al-hal?
Ahlan bikum. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Equally honored to welcome Dr. Hatem Al-Haj. Ahlan wa sahlan bikum, Sayyidi.
Allah yabarak feekum. Ahsan alaikum.
Alhamdulillah. So quickly delving into this, we are at the end of the 250th day of the genocidal attack against our people, our brethren in Gaza and Palestine in general. There are many folds to this conflict, if you can call it a conflict between two quotes. And then there are many ramifications that befell our ummah, negative or positive, and the West in general also, in terms of the Muslim community that's living in the US, Canada, Britain, and otherwise. And we have seen many things happening. Of course, again, 250 days is a lot. And a lot of things took place, ending with the, college encampments and all the related political and communal effects, if you will, that are happening throughout the different states and also in Canada. We have, as a few brothers here, we've been following some of what you two gentlemen have been disseminating throughout the nasiha and the sharing of knowledge, if you will, and ending with the piece or the article that you published on Muslim Matters. It had an array of advice points and other things that we should, as a community, be cognizant of. Could I please maybe reintroduce our listeners to the summary of this article, if you will, by one of you?
Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa alihi wa sahbihi wa ala thumma ma ba'd. To proceed. Certainly we have all been observing the outpouring of sympathy, like from the Muslims for their brethren, for their brothers and sisters who are under this assault, this merciless assault for the last 8+ months. And we wanted to encourage them to continue their activism in support of their brothers and sisters in Gaza and in Palestine in general. But at the same time, we also wanted to share with them our sincere advice with regard to how we go about this effort, because we have to be clear on the objectives of the work that we do, and make sure that whatever strategies we have will serve that objective. All of it within the larger context of being Muslims, so servants of God, bound by the teachings of Islam, bound by the commands and the prohibitions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we are not completely free to basically strategize, to set out whatever objectives we may, and then strategize to reach those objectives. We do this within a certain framework, which is our ubudiyya, servitude to Allah, and our compliance with the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's basically the essence of what this was about, words of encouragement and advice.
Barakallah fikum. Imam Dawud, you started the article with a message of hope. It looks like you meant to have our orientation to start to be spiritual first. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and how that basically sets the framework?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. And also give a little background on what Dr. Hatem Hafidhullah Ta'ala was touching on. I contacted him after one of my dear friends, Dr. Asad Tarsin, who wrote a book on being Muslim, contacted me and said, Dr. Hatem wrote a couple of really nice posts that resonated, and perhaps, that I should write something and expound on what Dr. Hatem wrote. So I thought it was more proper for me to call Dr. Hatem and ask him to write it. And out of his generosity, he suggested that we co-authored it. So I just wanted to mention that background for the listening audience. So of course, we do want to not discourage any of the college students and others who are joining, us amongst our community. And alhamdulillah, there's been a lot of sacrifice and I feel a lot of sincerity from a lot of these students. I've actually spoke to encampments, not just here in Michigan, the University of Michigan and Wayne State, but I traveled to the West Coast when we had a weekend retreat on Futuah, and I spoke to the students at Stanford University as well as University of California, Berkeley. So I had a chance to see different iterations of encampments, and one where they were making prayer in Jama'ah and reciting the Burda, Qasidat al-Burda. And I saw another extreme of signage with queer intifada and other things that would clearly be amongst the munkarat that were being said and being chanted. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control. His divine decree shall be manifested. It will be victorious. We have the clean intentions, and we try to do what we can do, but the ultimate determiner of outcomes is Al-Qadir subhanahu wa ta'ala. We want to remind the people of that, and as well as the means are very important, as far as means are created, or asbab. So we're not negligent of asbab. At the same time, we don't put all of our hope in the asbab themselves, but is the Lord of the asbab, right? So these are kind of the things that we start off with. And as Dr. Hatem Hafidhullah Ta'ala mentioned, about our methodology, to remind the people that, the ends can never justify the means, right? The ends never justify the means. And so we have the guardrails of the Sharia, of the Islamic sacred law. And then we also have adab, because in joining good and forbidding the evil, there's adab, or proper etiquettes and comportment as well, in regards in joining good and forbidding the evil, which our youth, may Allah reward them, are striving to do this on behalf of our brothers and sisters who are suffering a genocide in front of the world, and really no one is coming to help them from any of the Muslim majority countries, really.
Barakallah feek, Imam Dawud and Shaykh Hatem. It's an honor to be speaking to both of you. One thing and forgive me, I'll play a little devil's advocate during this podcast, but
or angel's advocate.
Angel's advocate. Jazakallah khair for the correction. Well, one thing that, in discussion comes up a lot, and I think this also came up a lot in discussion of Sheikh Hatem's posts, in some of the comments. When we speak about the world of asbab and, having the absolute conviction and certainty and yaqeen that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is musabbibul asbab, he's the one who gives tawfiq, and he's the one who does tadbir as well. I mean, he's al-mudabbir. He's the one who's going to bring about results. Like, that's non-negotiable. There's always a discussion about, well, you have to give in a little so that you can actually, otherwise the world of asbab doesn't make much sense. I mean, think of the idea of coalitions. And part of the article speaks about being scrupulous in coalitions. Even from a qawaid fiqhiyya, from a fiqh maxims perspective, the ulama speak about, يُغْتَفَرُ فِي الْوَسَائِلِ مَا لَا يُغْتَفَرُ فِي الْمَقَاصِدِ. There's a little bit of leniency in the means that is not afforded when it comes to the main issues of the objectives and the ibadah and things of this nature. So this is a two-part question. The first is, are there any controls or dawabit that govern how we give in a little, like out of necessity, right? Because, Sheikh Hatem, you even wrote in one of your Facebook posts about this: objective reality should guide our calculations and planning. Divine assistance is real and important. However, God wanted this universe to be comprehensible and predictable, and wanted his nawamis, his universal laws, to govern it, be consistent. It was in context of khilafah, but the idea is that, you have to be practical. You have to play the game a little. What are the controls that govern that, such that doesn't enter into our aqidah when we're making these coalitions, when we're working with others that may have these different viewpoints that are really quite antithetical to what we believe in?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. I just want to say that the article certainly it had to be the size it was, otherwise, as Sheikh Dawud said, that not a lot of people will read it if it's too long. But I'm glad that we're having this podcast so that we can clarify certain points. I did, in my first encampment post, I did say that you just can't have like a completely puritanical approach and expect that you could function in reality in the world out there. So I have to point out a particular chapter in Imam Taymiyyah's Majmu' al-Fatawa that's very helpful. He's not basically the only one to point out this particular concept, but he certainly elaborated on it in much detail, which is the chapter called the Jami' fi Ta'arud al-Hasanat wa Sayyat, a comprehensive chapter on the discussion or on the conflict between good and evil, the conflict between good and evil. And he said that sometimes good and evil are mixed in a way that they cannot be separated. And in this case, you want to procure the greater good, even if you have to forsake the lesser good, and you want to repel the greater evil, even if you have to tolerate the lesser evil. And this is important. And sometimes good and evil are mixed in a way that you cannot basically procure the good without tolerating some evil. In this case, we have a fiqhi maxim that says دفع المفسدة أولى من جلب المصلحة. A fiqhi maxim that says that repelling the evil takes precedence over procuring the good or attaining the good. Now, is this fiqhi principle absolute? No, the erudite scholars did point this out, and as I said, it's not only Imam Taymiyyah, but Imam Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam as well. That they both have similar sort of conceptions of this particular topic. It is not that you basically forsake a much greater good for a much lesser evil. Otherwise, Kulthum radiallahu anha migrated from Mecca to Medina alone, despite the fact that it's impermissible for like a lone woman to travel alone. Particularly during those times, they used to be kidnapped. They used to be sold in slavery. So it was clearly prohibited. But she did. Why? The greater good. I mean, she's leaving Dar al-Harb to Dar al-Islam. The greater good here prevailed and should have been given precedence. So it is a matter of assessment. This, like it's a matter of judgment. You have when do we apply that principle or that legal maxim or that qaida fiqhiyya? If the good and the evil are equal, then in this case, yes. If the good and the evil are equal, then of course inaction would take precedence over action, because you need to pause then, because whatever good you procure, you commit a similar evil, an equal evil, or you bring about an equal evil. Then in this case, inaction takes precedence over action. What do I mean by all of this? I mean that, yes, sometimes you will have coalitions that are suboptimal. But if you go back to the article, it says exercise caution. It basically says exercise caution because it is not, so you should not, it should not, the number of people out there on your side should not be the sole objective. You should be taking all things in consideration. What is the impact of bringing in a particular person to my protest or to my encampment? What is the impact of this on my youth? What is the impact of this on my image as a community? These are things that need to be taken in consideration, should not be neglected. That is what we were saying. We were not saying that you will have, every time you get into a coalition, you'll have to get into a coalition with the most pristine, purest, godly people out there, because it probably isn't always possible. And the Prophet ﷺ got into a coalition with Khuza'ah when they were not Muslim. At least, some of them were, but Khuza'ah in general were not Muslim when the Prophet ﷺ got into an alliance with them. And Hilf al-Fudul, all of us remember Hilf al-Fudul, remind each other of Hilf al-Fudul. That was not an alliance between Muslims. So sometimes you will get into coalitions with people that have basically variant or different agendas and suboptimal behavior. But a calculation needs to be had before you get into a coalition. And you need to be really careful not bringing about greater evil or equal evil even. And that's the point that we wanted to make.
What I would say, just in addition, and this is for the people who are watching or listening, who are listening to this, and many activists and people on college campuses have gone down this route and some haven't, and you can tell the difference. But we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of scripture, the people of knowledge, if you don't know. And it's always good for the youth and the younger people that are involved to consult the ulama, to consult scholars like Dr. Hatem, and to get nasiha on these very salient points, instead of just thinking, we just need to have the largest coalition possible so that we can make the most noise. Or now some of the terminology is, they don't even call it protest, they call it disruption. We have to disrupt, which is really inspired from neo-Marxism, actually. So for the likes of the students who are listening when having protests, that I suggest that you contact the ulama and ask for their advice about these parameters, as Shaykh Hatem mentioned, Hafidhullah Ta'ala. أحب علماء ولست منهم. Right. That's why I say you ask the likes of Sheikh Hatem.
الله يبارك فيكم ويحسن إليكم شيخ الله يكرمكم.
I'm not from the scholars. I love the scholars and I sit at their feet, but I'm not one of them. So I just want to be clear when I'm talking about the scholars, I'm not referring to myself.
نفعنا الله بكم شيخ الله يبارك فيكم ويحسن إليكم.
It's Imam Shafi'i who said that. So if he can
he said no. Imam Shafi'i said I love the Salihin, but I'm not from them. I just changed it from a Salihin to ulama. But I'm not from the Salihin either. So
Barakallah fikum wa nafa'a bikum. Yeah, just to remind our audience, I guess in a really quick scan of what both Sheikh Hatem and Imam Dawud, Hafidhahullah, they both mentioned, of course, some of the precautions and the things that you mentioned, Imam Dawud, of course, about some of the tactics that are not from within the Islamic parameters in terms of activism. So in a quick scan, of course, you mentioned in the article, be careful of any form of physical violence, blatant intimidation, destruction of vandalism of private or public property, using profanity in chants or slogans, disregarding Islamic teachings on modesty and gender interaction, facilitation of the teachings at encampments that promote or seek to normalize the forbidden, and of course, blocking highways or bridges in the name of disruption. Finally, hunger strikes in the name of solidarity with the people of Gaza. All these things are not from within the parameters of the Sharia and what we should adhere to in terms of our struggle to aid our brothers and sisters in Gaza. However, I wanted to, bring this up a little bit, maybe wider, especially, speaking about, rethinking or having folks check always with Ahl al-Ilm or Ahl al-Dhikr. It seems that in general, things are not that much calculated, especially when it comes to building coalitions or to being active. I want to invite you both to kindly chime in terms of the ijtihad, if you will. Like, do we have some sort of Siyasah Shar'iyyah as a Muslim community in the West? Do we have points of reference that are more of just like I read the things that shouldn't be done in the article that are, of course, very important, but are there parameters, are there guidelines that were thought about for the Muslim community in general? Because I can think of myself as a college student in any U.S. city, and then I'd be like, where do I go? I may be able to send a couple of emails here and there. Maybe I heard about Dr. Hatem Al-Haj, and I'm able to find him online and send a couple of emails. But those who are thinking maybe they can go to your nearest Muslim, center or to a masjid. And we have a whole lot of diaspora of approach and thoughts about this. Some people are, excuse my language, nonchalant about this whole thing. Some people are, with totally different perspective. So where do people in general go? And do we live in a crisis of Siyasah Shar'iyyah, if you will, that, surrounds us as a Muslim community in the West?
So after consulting with some of my teachers here as well as in West Africa, I tried to give some guidelines regarding the issues of coalition versus allyship in layman's language in the book that I wrote that came out about 4 years ago called Towards Sacred Activism. So there's actually a chapter in that particular book where there's some general guidelines. It's using really, again, the language of the awam. Is not using the language of usuli scholars to try to give some basic guidelines, at least on this point. And of course, Dr. Hatem, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala, was elaborating and touching on these things in a very scholarly way and scholarly language. But there needs to be, of course, more development. And I've been saying this for years, and I've talked with a number of different scholars and du'at. I've been in conversation with several from different perspectives. Dr. Yasser Qadi is one of them I've spoken with, that there needs to be more engagement with the activists in having these discussions. Because what we do is we have ulama and we have mashayikh who are teaching texts. We have du'at who are giving khutb on Fridays and doing and teaching classes, giving muhadarat. And then we have leaders in the activist world. And in many cases, the youth on the college campuses and in the organizings, they're getting their cue from these leaders in the activist community and politicians more so than from the mashayikh, the people who study the sacred law and are grounded in, I can use the language of Iman, Islam, and Ihsan, right? So I think that's kind of the, besides this particular issue, and we see this, like, we see the reality of this when the fitting comes, right? When we see things coming on the ground, then we see the disconnect. So the challenge, not just for now, but long-term, is to have greater conversation and regular interfacing between, I hate to list them as two classes, but really two groups. But we have the people who are the ulama and the talab al-ilm, and then we have the leaders of the activism world and the community organizers. And really, there's not too many people in our community who really have a foot in both worlds, right? So there has to be more discussion, in my view.
Yeah, that's true. Allah yabarik fikum, Shaykh. We just wanted to start this discussion so that there will be some at some point in the future more collaboration and more coordination, I would say, between the two groups that Shaykh Hafidhullah mentioned. So I completely agree. It's a discussion that needs to be started. I have to say, though, so that I'm not pretending to be somebody I'm not, that I have not been really that active in sort of the activism space, or in that space. I haven't been that active in the space of political activism. So I don't think that I am that qualified to talk about activism. And part of it also is because, I have felt that I may not be the most suited person for this particular cause. I did not grow up in the U.S. I grew up in Egypt. I did not grow up in the U.S. I'm not as familiar with the culture as you guys are, everybody here except for me. So I just wanted to basically admit that first. Then the issue of Siyasah Shar'iyyah, you have to have understanding of the text and understanding of the reality in order for you to basically produce valuable output in Siyasah Shar'iyyah that pertains to a particular time and a particular place, particular circumstances, because circumstantial variables do affect this to a great extent. At AMJA, we have tried as much as we can to partake in this discussion and to help as much as we can. We actually had a conference on involvement in politics. We had declarations, but as I said, most of the AMJA scholars are not, have not grown up here, and that is a limitation that we have to be aware of. But we talked a little bit more on a sort of a higher level of abstraction, in that, our awareness, like whatever awareness we have of the context here, would be sufficient at that level of abstraction when it comes down to, the sort of more practical output or, involvement in these things, you do have to have more sort of awareness or knowledge of the reality or the space that you operate in, the paradigm that you operate within, which I don't have.
Barakallahu fikum. I actually wanted to follow up on a little bit on what Ghaidar was speaking about in terms of a reference point for how we engage. So just for some background, I'm from Gaza. That's where I'm from, and I think by necessity, as an imam here in the DMV in Maryland specifically, I found myself in a lot of circles, political circles, and meetings and engagements that I generally wasn't part of before. I mean, I would say from a personal perspective, I've always kind of been more, I leaned more towards a protest method of engagement with politics, and not so much, hands-on engagement through meetings, through advocacy, through this type of things. But I found myself thrown in this world like head on for many months right now. And one thing that I found myself reflecting on a lot, which is what I wanted to ask you, is do we have from an Islamic perspective, from a Sharia perspective, do we have concrete guidelines of this, protest, stand up to the Sultan approach versus no, there is some validity of working within and trying to place to apply some pressure from within? We find at least in the social media circles, a lot of younger people, this is a very contentious point depending on which side of the camp you are. And a lot of arguments happen. And from an Islamic perspective, I want to know, just from a Sharia perspective, do we have clear guidelines on this way versus that way? Is there room for differences on this? Do we take more than one approach, or do we say no, only in this method?
No, you take whichever approach that works, and you don't. One particular person may choose one approach, and another person may choose another approach. Divide and conquer, I guess. Why do we all have to be doing the same thing? If you're more inclined towards, sort of hands-on engagement with politicians, and someone else is more inclined or more suited for protesting and, encampments and things of that nature, then we can do that. One person may do both. It is basically, these are wasa'il, but these are, means to whatever objectives we have, but we have to be clear on the objectives. We have to be clear on the objectives. We have to be realistic also. Like, if you cause disruption, if you prevent people from catching their important flight, is this the type of advocacy you want to do at this time? I understand that, because keep in mind that, and I did alert people that they should not be they should not be conflating this type of movement with, the abolitionist movement or the civil rights movement. You have to pay attention to many things, including your size, including the fact that you're talking about American support. You're not talking about a very domestic issue here, such as the issue of civil rights. You're talking about still a foreign issue, despite the fact that America is extremely complicit in this genocide by aiding militarily, financially, diplomatically, in every respect. But at the end of the day, this is not seen by the American public as a domestic issue. It is still a foreign issue. And you have to pay attention to your size. You have to pay attention to your limitations also. You have to pay attention to your limitations as a Muslim who has to basically have sort of guidelines, guardrails in their movement. So as long as, and like I said, I'm not talking about being a puritanical here. I'm just talking about being sensitive to the guidelines, being sensitive to the issue of خير الخيرين وشر الشرين. العاقل ليس من يعرف الخير من الشر، لكن العاقل الذي يميز خير الخيرين وشر الشرين. The wise person is not the person who sorts out good from evil. Wise person is the person who sorts out the greater good from the lesser good and the greater evil from the lesser evil. So that's what I would say. Just like go forth. The problem with the legal maxim of dafa, of taking the legal maxim of dafa al-mafsada awla min jalb al-maslaha literally, or repelling the evil takes precedence over procuring the good in an absolutist sense, is that it leads to freezing paralysis, inaction, freezing and paralysis. We have a nuanced understanding of this principle, and we want people to be aware of this. Because that is an extension to the article. So thank you for having this podcast.
Barakallah feekum. Sheikh Dawud, do you have anything to comment on that, especially given your decades of experience in this sphere?
Well, you mentioned Ahkam al-Sultaniyah, and our scholars of the past have done a great job writing on this subject. I guess the caveat, and this is kind of camelbacking off of what Dr. Hatem said, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, is that they wrote these works and gave some general guidelines, but we're talking about the specifics, that they were not writing in the context of living in a Western liberal society and a democracy, right? With representative government and a system that we have here. So it's a totally different context. So we have to factor in the fiqh al-waqi', like the facts on the ground, when we're talking about this type of engagement. So I know in Philadelphia right now, Philadelphia is the asima of Dawud Salafiyah in America, Philly. There's even a split amongst the Salafis in Philadelphia when some apply a very, what we could say, traditional understanding is the way they understand it, and say, oh no, you're not supposed to protest. You're not supposed to say anything about this because this is like speaking out against the ruler, right? And we're Muslims here. We're guests of this land. We shouldn't be saying anything. And then there's another group with the Salafis that say, no, we have to speak out and say something about this because we live in this land and our tax dollars are helping to fund this genocide. So even amongst the Salafi camp, at least the African-American Salafis, because this is what I'm really talking about, even amongst them, there's like a disagreement about how to deal with this. So there's going to be ikhtilafat on these issues. And I think that, as long as a group is not bringing more harm in the way of their activism, that we can have different strategies and different ways of doing things. I remember as a young man, not related, but inshallah, we could take some benefit from what he said. It was close to 30 years ago. I was in a youth gathering, and Imam Warthaddin Muhammad rahmatullah alayh was asked a question about our political engagement and should we give more support to this party or this party? And he gave a very simple answer. He said, when Nabiullah Yaqub alayhi salam told his sons to go into Egypt, he said that they should go in through different gates. And he left it at that. That was his answer. He didn't go any further than that. But we all understood what that meant, right? To go in through different gates. So we all don't have to do things the same way as Shaykh Hatem Hafidhullah Ta'ala mentioned. But, the calculus thing comes is what that we are doing. Is it bringing more harm to the cause? Not just for what we're trying to do to help Palestinians, but will it do more harm for us in our standing as Muslims here in America, where we don't even make up 2% of the population, right? This is an election year. There is growing anti-Muslim sentiment in certain parts of the country, as the CARE report put out. It's probably been more discrimination against Muslim college students, professors, medical doctors in the last 9 months since 9/11. Right, for those of us who remember how tense things were in 9/11, after 9/11. So, we also have a responsibility to preserve our capacity to perform our wajibat and to be able to protect our institutions. We see now that some politicians are trying to pass legislation to want to close down that would close down some Islamic institutions, some Muslim-led institutions right now. So that's my only caveat in regards to it. We just can't we can't be reckless in the name of being courageous, as Imam Ghazali talks about Mizam al-Amal, that we have the wasat, which is a Shaja'ah, and then we have recklessness on one side and cowardice on the other. So we can't confuse being reckless for being courageous.
Yeah, Hafidhakumullah. Yeah, in fact, regarding the anti-Muslim incidents that were reported by CARE, they actually said, and this is on behalf of CARE, they said that in 2023, it is the highest recorded ever, not even during the time of 9/11, that the year 2023 has registered the highest recorded ever anti-Muslim sentiments and incidents that were reported to CARE. And, by that I mean it's 2023, of course, most concentrated post October 7th. So this gives us an indication, of course, and, to segue a little bit into, what you mentioned, Sheikh Hatem, Jazakumullah khair. I think one of your posts, in terms of the different possibilities of what can be done by those who seek to aid the Ummah out there in the Muslim majority countries. One of your posts, I believe, on Facebook, you mentioned something perhaps, and this is after, of course, you mentioned a whole lot of qualifications for the work here out there in the West. And then you mentioned, all of which you both gentlemen mentioned, alhamdulillah, but one suggestion that you had was very, kind of interesting to me. You did mention that perhaps it behooves us to start helping those Muslim majority countries become a little bit more free, become a little bit more able to, stand up to the oppression in Palestine, especially those countries around Beit al-Maqdis, those areas that are in the Middle East in particular. And I thought about this, and I had this kind of sorrow when I read this line, because, we're thinking about being proactive. And you did mention that the discussion about, political engagement or Siyasah Shar'iyyah in the West has just been started. Alhamdulillah, may Allah bless the ulama amja. They're alhamdulillah, that's good that they're starting the maybe tahqiq or the ijtihad. But for me, as somebody who especially comes from a Syrian background, it kind of fell as a point of sorrow, because all these past 12, 14 years, with the Arab Spring and the subsequent events that took place in Syria, Egypt, Libya, and the rest of the countries that were involved, it seemed that we had no proactive, and it seemed that we had no proactive approach to empowering those who seek change. And to play the angel's advocate, you did mention, Imam Dawud, that we need to, try to inculcate that kind of understanding. To the angel's advocate, I want to say that, well, we haven't been able to produce something to do that. In fact, those who were in the, and I remember some of the scholars who are in high institutions in the West, they were very vocal on some things that happened domestically, especially for the African American community. But then when it comes to Muslims out there in Muslim majority lands, they were very adamant about just not to go against the hakim, or not, or for the sake of not having bloodshed, or which is understood, of course. But when do we have a different approach? Why do we cling, especially for those kids? You mentioned something like, when somebody hears Al-Ahkam Sultaniyah, ya akhi, this is like centuries old book, ya akhi. Ma'qul, is it possible that we don't have anything that's out there, that's new, that's coming with a different approach? The past 14 years have challenged us significantly, and this comes as a bakura, like especially the things that are happening now in Gaza, the ihtiqan, or if like they say in Arabic, the inflammation has been really at its peak now. So I guess I'm just wondering out loud, and I know you mentioned already that we should start engaging, but are there things that can be clinged on for the everyday Muslim to pacify his yearning to try to do something with his friends or with her groups other than the acts of ibadah? Are there things that can be done, on the ground?
Yeah, I think that there are many things that can be done. I said this, the context in which I said this is basically that we have to be cognizant of the limitations of our short-term activism here, because there is short-term and long-term. Our activism is not going to change the equation of power. The equation of power does not change because you have, so certainly the equation of power will be influenced, impacted, but it is not going to radically change because you were able to establish some alliances and coalitions with some leftist groups on campuses in the U.S. I would invite you to go back and read my article about Jordan Peterson and Joe Biden and why basically we have to have humble expectations of our activism in America. Why is there so much support for Israel in America? How is this related to the Enlightenment philosophy and the sort of the social Darwinism that was basically going parallel to the Enlightenment philosophy, which leads to stratification of humanity? How the Judeo-Christian, so if you have like two different tributaries that comprise the mainstream American culture, you're talking about the Enlightenment, and that was really mixed with a lot of Darwinist ideas, or particularly, social Darwinism, and you have the Judeo-Christian tributary. And if you just go back to the article, because I don't want to waste your time, so you're not winning with this or that, or a mixture of both. So we have to understand that long term we need to basically try to influence the equation of power long term, try to change it. And the change will not come from here, no matter how much we need to do our best, because it is for our own moral integrity. We can't be sitting idle here seeing our brothers and sisters slaughtered. So we have to do something. We have to do our best here. And I'm not taking away from that. But we have to do it like within the, like knowing what objectives we're trying to basically create awareness. We're trying to influence public opinion. So there are certain things that would hurt our cause, and there are certain things that will help our cause. But that is what we're trying to do here. We're trying to cause a shift in the public opinion about this particular cause. But that is not going to basically liberate Palestine. It's not going to liberate Jerusalem. The change, the actual change in the equation of power that would result in long-term effects and will lead to, inshallah, the eventual liberation of Palestine has to do with Muslim majority countries, particularly Dawud al-Tawt, or the countries that surround Bayt al-Maqdis. They have always been the countries where help came from. Egypt, Syria, and Jordan and Palestine. It's Sham, Egypt, Turkey. Those are the countries where help had traditionally or historically come from, and these are the countries where help is expected to come from. A change in those countries, a positive change in the politics of those countries, will bring about a change in the equation of power. And that positive change we need, because people who are immersed in the conflicts there may need our help to give them a different perspective, because they are unable to grasp, they are unable to have the sort of the bird's eye view, because they are immersed in the conflict. So we need to tell them, and it is very hard for anyone to put me in any box. So because I have basically reservations, I'm not a quietist, and at the same time I am not, the sort of the inflamed, riled up activist who is basically insensitive to realities, insensitive to the equations of power, and also insensitive to Shar'i limitations that we have. And it seems that in our countries, we have basically a war between those two sides, and we have to say to them, there is a third way. There is a third way, and we have to help them find it. There is a third way. But in order for us to discuss the third way, we will take up the rest of the podcast. So I'll just stop here.
Yeah, I mean, maybe pointers to the third way, because I'm on the edge of my seat, Sheikhna.
No, I think that, I have always said that Islamists need to take a step back and join the masses in demanding righteous governance, demanding righteous representative governance, and Islam will organically take its rightful place in the public space once we have righteous representative governance. If that is like a quick summary, the details of that will need a few hours to be sort of discussed.
Barakallah fikum, and thank you for indulging me, Sheikhna. Imam Dawud, of course, we cope by connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We cope by trying to derive from our connection with the Prophet ﷺ, our reading of his seerah, our spiritual practice, until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings about the change that he subhanahu wa ta'ala knows when best to arrive. What are some of the best spiritual practices that you've been seeing, especially with, mashallah, with your track record of touring the Muslim community out there in the West? What have you been seeing in terms of the best responses spiritually as you visited some of the communities? What are some of the shining kind of practices or concepts, groundings, if you will, that are helping us? Because we can engage in all sorts of political and academic theorizing. We will still need to come back to our homes, and our hearts are perturbed. So how do we make them still?
So, mashallah, my mentor, some people call him America's Imam Zaid Shakir, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, just in Michigan. I was just spending 3 days with him. And we were talking about this, and the differences, what we saw was some of the encampments, because he went to Berkeley as well, like I did, but he also was talking about Princeton. So Princeton's encampment. So number one, that we as Muslims in all these encampments and protests, it's better for us to take the leadership and then set the tone and guidelines instead of joining other people's efforts, right? Because at the Princeton encampment, or even at the University of Michigan, the Muslims set the guidelines, which then also set the tone. For instance, there were no weird flags at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, because the Muslim students took the initiative. They had something called Tahrir Coalition. And he said, because we're centering Palestine, there's going to only be the Palestinian flag that's going to be flown at the encampment, which means no rainbow flags or other like weird flags, right? Not just the salah, but there was tadhkir. There was different du'at and different scholars that came to sit with the students and talk with the students, even come to prayer, and that also helps in the grounding. So for those who are the students, being in jama'ah and positive suhbah is so important on the ahwal, or the spiritual states. Like we know the power and the influence of positive spirituality that can have on the spiritual states of us being around spiritually healthy people, as the report from Abu Dhar al-Ghafari, where it's reported that he said that being in righteous company, or a jalis salih, is better than al-wihda, better than being alone, right? Better than solitude. But being in solitude is better than being in bad company, right? So to have these opportunities. Also at these gatherings, I mentioned the Qasidat al-Burda was mentioned or was recited, but also the spiritual effects of As-Salat al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam on the spiritual states. And we can't underestimate this. It's one of the most efficient ways of raising our spiritual stations. And we know from the hadith of Ubay bin Ka'ab, that if we just recite this As-Salat al-Nabi, it would be enough to take away our ham, like our worries, our distress, as well as forgiveness of our sins. So I recommend it to some of the students that, to have a regular spiritual routine or wird of doing 1,000 As-Salat al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, right? And these are things that really help. I know back in the day when I starting off of implementing this for myself, that I saw benefit from this As-Salat al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And then going back to the suhbah and perhaps, mashallah, I'm sure Dr. Hatem will have some more beneficial things to say. Actually, I have his translation right here of Manazil al-Sa'irin, mashallah. It's a very beneficial text to tasawwuf from the Hanabila, and the Hanabila do have tasawwuf. This is a misunderstanding that some people have. That just simply being in spaces in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is remembered, because we know that tranquility comes from the hearts, from the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this helps up with the optimism. I mentioned to the students, and sorry for being long-winded, but I mentioned to the students at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, I want to give them some perspective, because we know that at one time during the Crusade, that Jerusalem and Palestine was occupied by the Crusaders. Matter of fact, for about a century, Muslims couldn't even freely pray in the Masjid al-Aqsa. Ibn al-Athir, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said that it was up to 70,000 people were slaughtered in less than a month, right? In that area. Western historians downplay it and try to say it's only 40,000, but let's say 40,000, right? And I told them, like, that number far exceeds what's been, it's over double, right? What took place within like the first 4 or 5 months in Gaza. And I said, but, from this era, it was a great revival that came in the Ummah, the likes of Ibn al-Jawzi al-Hanbali and Sidi Abdul Qadir al-Jilani al-Hanbali and Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi al-Hanbali. And this is when the establishment of the Fatuwa guilds took place, right? So there was a great spiritual revival. And through this tajdeed, within a couple of generations, this is what produced Salahuddin al-Ayyubi and this multi-ethnic group of Muslims. I mean, Salahuddin was Kurdish. You had Kurds, Arabs, you had Africans, you had Turks, you had all sorts of people that were involved in that endeavor of liberating Al-Quds. And as we, as a multi-ethnic community in America, this issue, we have our predecessors to look back on to see what did they do as far as reviving the hearts of the Muslims. That once the revival of the hearts came, then that's when the unity came, and then they were able to actually do something, right? So I think, as Dr. Sherman Abdul Hakim Jackson said, I say this all the time. I was speaking with him recently about this. Dr. Jackson said, hard work is the hard work, right? Protesting isn't the hardest work. The encampment in and of itself isn't the hardest work. Picking up a telephone and calling your congressperson is not the hardest work. It's the hard work. That is the hard work. And I believe that as much as I've been involved in the activism realm, these days I speak very little about politics. Most of my dawah is in regards to tazkiyah, right? As much of what I talk about these days, because I think that in these days and time, that's really the priority, and Allah knows best.
Barakallah fikum. This reminds me actually of some of the objections that were raised at the time of the activism and the things that were happening in the Middle East, that some of the mashayikh were saying, please ground yourselves in tazkiyah, ground yourselves in dhikr and trying to come closer to Allah so you can maintain your unity. And then there was this, dajar by many of the muthaqafin, or those who try to claim the posts of speaking to the masses and via social media or not. They were like, you guys keep telling us, tazkiyah, this and that, and then we want results. And of course, we've seen the results. Unfortunately, they haven't been in the way that our ulama told us, and through what you mentioned, barakallah fiqh. As we close, inshallah, I think we've got into a full circle dimension of this article and the rest of the general approach, if you will. Any particular nasiha or any final thoughts that you would like to share with us? I'll start with Shaykh Hatem.
Alhamdulillah. As Muslims, we have to support our brothers and sisters in Gaza and Palestine, and we have to support this cause. This cause is very special to us, and it's a very exceptional one. And I'm not saying this because I'm Egyptian and because I grew up with this cause being very special to me. But there are many reasons why this cause is a very special cause. But as the Shaykh Dawud Hafidhullah said, the ultimate objective is the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have to keep this in mind. We have to keep this in heart all the time as we, go forth and as we proceed to do anything. Whatever it is that we do, whatever the obligation of time is, it has to be grounded in, a spiritual and a moral foundation, a solid spiritual and moral foundation that basically separates us Muslims from people of different agendas. The Shaykh mentioned neo-Marxists at the beginning of this episode. So we have a different worldview, we have a different outlook, and we have a different purpose in life. And everything that we do has to be within that framework and has to be grounded within these foundations, spiritual and moral commitments. And it is like an infinite source of power and wisdom. If we ground ourselves in our Islamic spirituality and our Islamic morality, this will not basically keep us back. It will not restrain us. It will not weaken us. It will give us immense power, confidence, and wisdom at the same time. Inshallah.
One last closing comment is I would just say to our brothers and sisters who are listening that our objective, of course, is our ultimate objective is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should be seeking Allah. Ilahi anta maqsudi ridaka matlubi. Right? Allah should be our objective, and His felicity is our desire, is the dua, Shah Naqshband, radiallahu an. I would also say that one of the best things that we could do to help our brothers and sisters in Palestine is da'wah, is calling people to Islam, right? And we as a people, we must be sincere and be concerned about the salvation of the people. Like, we should have a real concern that the people come to Islam for their betterment in this life and for their salvation in the next life. And if the people of the United States of America come to Islam, right, through our call, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, then this could be a great opening for the people of Palestine, right? But we're not doing it simply that we can't just view the American people as some sort of transactions, political transactions, or we just want their support and their solidarity just so that they can help us with Palestine. No, we should be concerned about their souls in this life and the next life. We call them, we should be doing khidmah and not seeking any reward, right? We're doing it seeking the wajh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if we do this, then I believe that it can be a great opening for Islam in the West. And if we can get things right here in America by default, with Allah's permission, things can get right in Palestine, because the Zionist occupation of Palestine could not take place without the economic, military, logistical, and cultural support of the United States of America, right? Without that, then that occupation ceases to exist, right? So, but is not just simply through politics, it's through the da'wah, calling people to life, to Allah and the best of His creation, Al-Habib, Al-Mustafa Muhammad, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.
Barakallah feekum, jazakumullah anna kul khair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you both. May Allah azza wa jal always continue to benefit through you. I encourage all of our listeners, for those who are not acquainted with both Dr. Hatem as well as Imam Dawud's works, you can find, mashallah, for shorter articles, you can read a lot of them on Facebook. That's where Shaykh Hatem primarily writes. He also has a website. But I also encourage you as well to purchase or read some of his books. Shaykh Hatem has a book that kind of touches on some of the issues of alliances, on the idea of al-wala, al-bara, or love and hate in Islam. You can find it on Amazon. And Imam Dawud, in addition to many of his other books, one of his more pertinent ones here is Towards Sacred Activism. It was very, very beneficial for me personally years ago when it first came out. I really encourage everyone to read it. It's very short. You can read it in one sitting. And benefit from the guidelines, especially activists. If there's any people that are participating in the college encampments or participating in any type of activism, we'll learn what our worldview on that, even that term, that's another podcast, but you can read that book, inshallah. It will help ground us from an Islamic perspective. Barakallah feekum for all that you do, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you.
Ameen. Jazakumullah khair both for joining us. May Allah bless you and bless your work and family. And inshallah ta'ala, we look forward to seeing you in person, inshallah, very soon, and in future events that benefit our community. May Allah grant victory to our brothers and sisters in Gaza. And may Allah elevate us all and deliver us from evil from around the world. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Please, for all our listeners, don't forget to like and share, like they say, and try to give us any feedback that betters your experience with ImanWire. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.